Hey there. You sent over the UN's recommendations on governing AI for this deep dive. And wow,
It's dense,
definitely not light reading material.
but that's why we're here, to break it down together.
Absolutely. And I think this report, it's really critical for anyone even, remotely curious about the future.
Totally agree. It's almost like, I don't know, like the UN is sending up this flare saying, hey, look, AI is here. It's like changing everything. We need a plan.
Yeah.
And we gotta figure this out.
They actually use this term global governance deficit. And I know that might sound like, jargony a little bit,
It does.
but think of it like this. Like imagine if you're building a house, right? And you're building it with absolutely no blueprint.
Oh, that's a recipe for disaster.
Right. Everyone's just kind of like hammering away, hoping for the best. Yeah. Right. And they're even calling out, that we've got like bits and pieces of rules here and there. Different countries are doing their own thing.
Right.
But this isn't building a birdhouse. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? This is AI with the potential to impact
Exactly.
everything.
It touches everything. And that's really what they're talking about here, this lack of coordination, this lack of a cohesive plan on a global scale. And so we're talking about, ensuring that AI is developed and used responsibly, ethically, and that it benefits, everyone, not just a select few, right? And that requires a shared understanding. It requires almost like a common language.
Yeah, to even talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it feels like
if
it's
it's
such a broad topic. Like, how do you even wrangle all of that?
And that's the challenge.
It's a huge challenge.
It's a huge challenge, yeah. And so I think for your listeners out there, I mean, you really have to imagine like a world where AI development is basically like the Wild West,
Yeah.
No rules, just potential for chaos.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're talking about with this governance gap that the UN is raising the alarm about. And frankly, it's something that we should all be paying attention to.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so interesting about this report is they are raising the alarm, but they're also like, they're not just...
They're offering solutions.
Yeah, they're offering solutions.
Yeah.
And they're trying to like lay down a little bit of like a path forward.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, a really good sign because it would be easy to just be like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling and, leave it at that. But they're like, no, we
can do this.
We can do this. Let's figure it out.
We can do that.
And they dive into the risks. And I think this is where it gets really, really eye-opening because they're not just talking about, robots taking over the world.
Right.
It's so much more nuanced than that.
It's so much deeper than that.
Yeah, it's like they actually break down the risks by who's most vulnerable.
Exactly.
So whether it's like individuals or like, entire societies or the economy or like even the environment, like they're really looking at it from all these different angles.
And I think that's really smart, right? Because it allows for a much more targeted approach to governance.
Yes, instead of just this like broad stroke of like...
Right, exactly. And so, you can think about it, for example, when we talk about individuals, the report, they talk about things like privacy violations, right? And imagine AI being used for mass surveillance, right?
Oh, yeah.
Eroding our fundamental rights without us even really realizing it, right?
Yeah, it's like that saying, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. But it's like applied to like algorithms, just like
right, exactly.
sifting through every aspect of our lives. And I think to me, that's always where I get a little like...
It's a little creepy.
A little creeped out. It's like, okay.
But creepy, for sure.
How much do we really want them to know? And like, what are they doing with that information?
And for what purpose? And who has access to it? Like, those are all important questions. And that's just one example, right? They also discuss, this potential for AI to really kind of worsen existing inequalities, right?
Yeah.
So think about, access to things like education or healthcare, even, justice, right?
Yeah.
Algorithms can perpetuate biases. They can discriminate against certain groups without even necessarily being programmed to do so, right?
Yeah, because it's like that whole thing. It's like garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
Like if you're
100%.
feeding it with biased data, it's going to spit out biased results.
Precisely. And it's not even just about what AI might do intentionally, right? It's also about the unintended consequences of its actions. And those are the things that we really need to be prepared for. And that's why this UN report, it really stresses this importance of things like impact assessments and this ongoing monitoring of AI systems.
Right.
Because we need to be able to sort of course correct if things start heading in the wrong direction.
100%. I mean, this is heavy stuff. I mean, and you'd mentioned the environment earlier, and like, what are the concerns there? Because that's something.
Yeah, it's one of those things that kind of flies under the radar a lot of times, Because obviously, AI, it's all digital wizardry and ones and zeros.
Place
And
feels very, like, clean.
yeah, it feels very clean. But it has a very real physical footprint in the
That's
world. It's true.
right. And the amount of energy that's required to train and run these, like, massive AI models, it's actually staggering.
Yeah.
We're talking about data centers that consume as much electricity as entire cities. You know?
Oh, wow.
So, if we're not careful, the environmental costs of AI, they could very well end up outweighing, the benefits. So, that's
Right.
something to really keep in mind.
So essentially, we've got all these potential pitfalls, right? We've got the
Mhm.
AI eroding privacy.
Yeah.
We've got, potentially exacerbating these inequalities.
Mm.
And then on top of that, you've got the environmental concerns.
So it's like the UN is basically saying, like, look, we got to be awake to all these different risks if we actually want to harness AI for good.
Hmm.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right? Like, they wouldn't come out with this whole report and, like, lay out all these problems if they didn't at least have an idea of, like, what some of the solutions might be.
Right. They do offer some solutions. The report lays out 7
They do.
concrete recommendations. And I think what's really refreshing about it is they acknowledge that there's not just this one-size-fits-all solution, right?
Right.
It's not like you can just impose a single set of rules on everyone and everything will be okay, right?
Yeah.
The world of AI is much too diverse for that, right? You have different countries, different cultures, different values at play.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's so much more complex than just
It's very, very complex.
coming up with one set of rules. And so, like, what are they kind of suggesting as far as, like, how we approach this in a more, I guess, like, nuanced way?
Right. Well, so they propose this more collaborative approach, and they actually call it a networked institutional approach, which again,
Sounds a little jargony.
it's a mouthful, but if you
Yeah.
if you kind of unpack that a little bit, you can think about it almost like a web, right? So you've got these different actors, right? You've got governments,
Right.
you've got international organizations, research institutions, even private companies, and they all kind of have a role to play in shaping, the future of AI, right?
Really.
No one entity, no one group has all the answers.
Right. It's more like a global brainstorming session as opposed to just like a decree from,
Exactly,
on
yeah.
high.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more interesting
Mhm.
aspects of the report. And within this network, right, within this sort of web of different actors, they do propose some really interesting concrete steps, right? And so one of those, for example, is they call for the creation of an international scientific panel on AI.
So like a global brain trust
Exactly.
dedicated to AI.
Yeah. So you can kind of think of it like, the panel on climate change,
Okay.
but
Yeah,
for
yeah.
algorithms. And
Yeah.
so the idea is that this panel would provide, unbiased, science-based advice to policymakers all around the world, right?
Right.
And this would really help them, make these more informed decisions about, how to regulate, how to govern, artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Because right now, it's an emerging field.
It's moving so fast.
It's moving so fast, and there's so much, frankly, misinformation and hype and fear-mongering around AI
Yes, there is.
that it's really hard to kind of cut through all that noise and figure out
Yeah.
what are the real risks, what are the real opportunities.
Yeah. What is actually real? And like, what are people just like making up to scare us or whatever? It's
Exactly. And I think that having a body like this that can really kind of provide that sort of like, neutral, objective, science-based
Yeah.
assessment of this innovation, I think could be really, really valuable as we
Definitely.
move forward. And, another really interesting part of the report is that they dive into this, this really kind of thorny issue of like open versus closed AI systems.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the great AI recipe debate.
Right.
It's like, do you share your algorithms with the world or do you keep them, under lock and key?
Precisely.
Like what's the deal? And
That's the million-dollar question.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like, I don't know, I go back and forth because on the one hand, I do think there is some value to like, open AI in terms of fostering collaboration, potentially speeding up innovation.
Sure.
Right. But at the same time, it does kind of like increase the risk of misuse.
Of course. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, how do you balance those two things?
Mhm. Right. And I think that's the crux of the issue. And the report, it acknowledges that there are valid arguments to be made on both sides of that, right? OpenAI, like you said, it fosters collaboration, it can speed up innovation, but it also, like you said, it does increase that risk of misuse, Whereas closed AI, might be necessary, especially for like, certain sensitive applications, military applications, things like that. But then if you have too much secrecy, right, then that can stifle progress, and it can also concentrate power in the hands of, just a select few.
Right, right.
So it's this real balancing act, and I think, it's something that, the UN doesn't necessarily provide a definitive answer to, but they really stress the need for what they call meaningful openness, right?
Meaningful openness,
Okay.
okay?
Yeah. So it's about being really strategic and considering the context and finding those ways to share knowledge and resources responsibly, but also without compromising, safety, security, all those things that we care about.
Right, right. So it's not an easy question to answer, that's for
Yeah.
sure. But it's definitely something that I think for you listening, this whole debate about open versus closed AI,
Yeah.
this is only going to get more and more kind of like front and center
Yeah.
in the coming years as this technology continues to evolve.
Yeah, 100%.
And so it's definitely like something to keep an eye on and to like,
Yeah, I think so too, because I mean, when you really think about it, the choices that we make now about, how open we are or how closed we are with AI, those are going to have really long-lasting implications. Not just for innovation, but also for, security, for access, for all these different things.
right. And so it's not something that should just be left to like the tech people to decide.
Exactly. This is a conversation for everybody.
The conversation for everybody because it's going to impact everybody ultimately.
Precisely. And that's, I think that's the overarching message of this report, right? Is that the future of AI, it's not preordained.
Mhm.
It's not something that's already been decided.
Right.
It's something that we are all shaping right here, right now,
Yeah.
through the choices that we make, the conversations that we have, even the questions that we ask.
Right. So that's what we've been trying to do today with this deep dive. We've, unpacked the UN's recommendations, explored those risks, glimpsed some of the potential of AI, and it's a lot to process. But hopefully, you listening, now feel a little bit more, I don't know, equipped to like navigate this complex landscape that is artificial intelligence and how it's all,
And how it's evolving.
yeah, how it's evolving at like lightning speed.
Right. And it's not going to slow down anytime soon. So the best thing we can do is educate ourselves, stay informed, and really like not be afraid to ask those tough questions.
Yes, 100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep those sources coming, and we'll keep diving deep.
Sounds good.